All right, let's talk about counterproductive behaviors. I alluded to these in the last chapter. So, with counterproductive behaviors, we're talking about any behavior that is intended by the person who's performing it to bring harm to an organization, its employees, or its stakeholders. So, this is an employee who, on purpose, is doing something that they know or hope will be harmful. Counterproductive behavior. So it includes things like theft, sabotage, aggression. The different research on the link between job satisfaction and these behaviors range from negative 0.1 to negative 0.25 correlations. And so the key thing to notice in that is that it's negative. So the more satisfied a person is in the job, the less likely they are to engage in counterproductive work behaviors. But it's not a really super strong category correlation. So it's possible that people who are basically satisfied with their jobs might engage in some of these behaviors for other reasons. It might be that they have a personal, negative attitude towards an individual, and these counterproductive behaviors are designed to harm that person. And so it's not about the job satisfaction, it's about that person satisfied. Like, I don't like that person, or I don't like how that person has treated me. And I'm trying to sort of put them back in their place or something like that. It could be that I'm satisfied with the job, but I don't like the stakeholders. I don't like the people who own it or are financing it or something like that. So it could be specific, that it's like, I like the job. If only this person wasn't here or that stakeholder wasn't involved, this would be the perfect job. And it might be an attempt to sort of encourage those people to move out or something. But a lot of times it's job satisfaction or it's personality problems. A lot of times in the ones that it's not, in either things that I mentioned before, it could be personality disorder kind of things. Counterproductive behaviors aren't going to be corrected by having super happy employees necessarily. So let's talk about organizational commitment. This is the relative strength of an individual's identification with, attachment to, and involvement in a particular organization. So the link between organizational commitment and job satisfaction is pretty good, right? People who are satisfied with their jobs tend to be more committed to the organization. Now, it's not a perfect one correlation. We've got a lot of room to explain some of organizational commitment with something other than job satisfaction. We can explain job satisfaction with something other than organizational commitment. But those are pretty good correlations, especially in the field of psychology. That's pretty good. So again, we have antecedents that lead to commitment, and then we have consequences of the commitment. So let's start with the antecedents. You're going to notice I'm very similar in my strategy. I was going to stop here first and talk about the components of organizational commitment. And these were offered by Meyer and Allen. So affective commitment is your emotional attachment to the organization, how sort of, you might call it, loyal you feel towards the organization. People who are higher in affective commitment tend to have a strong belief in and acceptance of the organization's goals and values. They're really sort of wrapped up in the organization. They have a willingness to exert effort on behalf of the organization because of their affective commitment. And they have a strong desire to remain a part of the organization. They feel like they might use words like, I feel like this is my home. I feel like my coworkers are my family. They use those kinds of words. Continuance commitment is sort of the degree to which you are committed to staying with the organization. And it might be in part due to, that sunk cost fallacy, right? Where you're like, well, I've already given this organization 10 years and I'll lose all the status I've grown here and all the connections I have. I'll lose all that. And so because I've already invested so much, I should keep doing it. That's a sunk cost way of thinking about things. I've already sunk so much into this that I might as well just continue. And so that's one factor that contributes to continuance for sure. So that's, I just thought I'd throw that in. Of course, it could be that you're continuing because of your affective ties to the place, but it could also be because you're like, well, I can't quit now. And then there's normative commitment, which is this feeling of a moral obligation to continue employment with the organization. And so some people feel really strongly that that they should stay with an organization, not that because they love it and this is their family and all that affective stuff, not because they're like, well, I've invested so much, I have to keep going, like we might see with the sunk cost approach, but instead this is like, I should. It would be wrong for me to quit. I actually knew someone who got hired straight out of college into a job, was really happy with the job and stuff, but it was a long commute. And wasn't quite exactly like immediately upon getting hired, the person got promoted, but into a role that the person didn't want. It wasn't what they got hired on to do, and it wasn't what they ever saw their career being. And so we have 2 strikes against this job. It turns out this is a really long drive, and in fact, the employee moved after getting hired, and it was even farther. So it's too far, and I'm not doing what I thought I would be doing and what I wanted to be doing when I entered this career and when I got hired into this job. So everybody would say to this person, why don't you quit? Like, there are so many other places where you could be doing this exact job that are really close to you that would allow you to do the job that you want and not promote you into this sort of administrative level that you didn't want to be in. And the answer that person gave was, but they were the first ones to hire me out of college. Don't I owe them like a year? Aren't I required to stay here? It's like, no, you are not required. There's no moral obligation to continue working for anyone when it's not suiting your needs anymore. Interestingly, that story was 8 years ago, and that person continues to work there. So I don't think it's the 1 year anymore. I think it really is some kind of like moral thing that makes that person feel like they have to stay. I mean, at least that's what they say. I don't know if that's what they really feel like, but it's what they say. All right, so moving on to my picture that looks like what I had done for job satisfaction. I like consistency. So we have our antecedents of organizational commitment. There are the organizational mechanisms, so things like the ability, the socialization with your peers, the presence of logos, insignias, programs for family newsletters, reward systems, these kinds of things that are available. And what they find is that these kinds of organizational mechanisms tend to lead to affective commitment more than the other two, types of organizational commitment. Individual or personal characteristics, things like your age, your job level, are you an entry level? Are you like really well established? Like, where are you in your career path? The stress that's associated with the career. We have about a 0.21 correlation between those factors and then continuance commitment. And then the social factors like coworker relationships, participation in social interaction, role variables, supervisory relationships, those kinds of things are correlated with affective commitment and normative commitment. The normative commitment, that moral obligation sense, is more likely to develop if the supervisor is considerate of the employee and if the supervisor communicates openly and frequently so that the employee feels like they are being dealt with honestly. That tends to help foster a normative commitment to continue. So, kind of a messy picture by the time I got done with it. But organizational, very straight line to affective commitment. Individual and personal characteristics, very straight line into continuance commitment. And then social factors, it's both affective and normative that are influenced by that. All right, what are some of the consequences of organizational commitment? Well, of course, performance is one of our areas of interest. And we've got, of course, task performance and contextual performance. Affective commitment tends to predict performance, and it's stronger with what we call extra role performance. We talked about this in another chapter, how sometimes people will take on tasks that are not part of their role, but they sort of start doing it to be helpful, to be efficient, to just like get it done. The more a person takes on those kinds of extra roles, the more likely they are to have affective commitment And that tends to cause them to perform at a higher level than a person who doesn't have affective commitment. So how about withdrawal behaviors as consequences? Again, affective commitment predicts absenteeism, again, a negative correlation. So the more like emotionally tied you are to the workplace, the less likely you are to be absent or to leave, to turn over. I don't have data on lateness, but at least on absenteeism, it's a negative correlation, and with turnover, it's a negative correlation. In fact, on turnover, if we look at not just people who actually leave the job, but we ask people if they have an intention to leave the job, now we've boosted that correlation quite a bit. So thinking about leaving is negatively correlated with affective commitment. So the more affective commitment, the less likely a person is to say that they're thinking about leaving, and the lower the affective commitment, the more likely they are to say that they're thinking about leaving. Counterproductive behaviors. Don't really have much research on the link between organizational commitment and counterproductive behaviors. This is an area, if you're interested in IO Psych, that is open for new data because we really don't have much on that. All right, how about employment commitment? Here's a survey from the McKinsey Health Institute. It was conducted in 2022. The orange bar, or what would you call it, rust-colored bar, represents the percentage of respondents who said that they were experiencing burnout. It's important to note that burnout is sort of an imprecise term. It's one of those concepts. We all kind of know what it means, though, don't we? You're sort of like, I need a weekend. I need a week. I need a summer break. I think we know what burnout is, even though it hasn't been well defined. It's a concept. Distress is in the light gray bar. So distress includes any kind of like psychological sort of negativity. It also could include, somatic symptoms like stomach aches or headaches, stiff necks, things like that. So that's in the light gray bars. And then the darker gray bar is commitment. And so what you see along the y-axis is different countries, and you see that like burnout, it seems to be lowest in China, right? And then it seems to be highest in Japan. And then, distress looks pretty even across the countries, but, maybe Japan and China are reporting a little lower. It's a little bit, I don't know if that'd be a significant difference. But look at the organizational commitment differences. It looks like China has the strongest organizational commitment, and then maybe followed a little bit by the UK, but the other three countries are pretty much neck and neck as far as organizational commitment. So it doesn't look like being burned out or distressed prevents commitment. I mean, it looks like they might be sort of independent, right? So kind of an interesting thing to discover, that maybe it doesn't matter how burned out or distressed you are for whether you're feeling committed to your organization anymore. Now, I thought sticking with the cross-cultural comparisons, I thought I'd show us comparison of absenteeism across different countries. And so you see the United States down there towards the bottom with 7.8 absenteeism days per year. So these are people who are calling in and saying, I can't come in today for whatever reason. So we're sort of in the middle, really, because you look at, there's kind of a cluster, right? You have like Switzerland, Ukraine, Malta, United Kingdom. They're all sort of hovering in the U.S. at less than 10, right? Then you've got Australia at 11.2, Norway at 14.6, Canada 11.6, so sort of in the teens, Germany at 18. And then you've got Bulgaria. What's wrong at work in Bulgaria? That they've got 22 absenteeism days in a year. That's a lot. So you do start to wonder, like I said, what's wrong in Bulgaria? Like either they're getting sick a lot, or people they know are getting sick, or people need to be cared for, or they're avoiding their job for some reason, right? So the U.S. is actually in one of the lower levels of absenteeism. Maybe it's because of factors that, about like being rewarded for being absent or not, or I don't know. All I know is that cross-culturally we see differences. That's all I can say. Okay, so this is a good point to break, and we'll talk about how to reduce absenteeism in our next video.